In the Middle Ages, death wasn't seen as one sudden moment, but as a slow passage from one world to another. When someone took their final breath, people didn't rush to close the chapter of the body. They waited, sometimes for days, beside the still figure surrounded by candles, hymns, and whispered prayers. That waiting carried both love and fear. Fear that the soul hadn't yet gone. Fear that the body might wake again. Fear that forgetting too soon would mean losing them twice. These long, quiet vigils were not just superstition, but an act of deep human longing, a refusal to let go of life too quickly. The boundary between life and death was hazy. Without doctors or medical tools, no one could be certain when death truly came. People who fainted from fever, plague, or poison could seem lifeless for hours or days. Stories of the dead who opened their eyes during a burial or inside a coffin spread across Europe, filling imaginations with both awe and dread. To the medieval mind, the soul lingered near the body, unsure of its way. So families waited and watched, candles flickering beside the stillness, hoping for a sign, a movement, a sigh, that the soul still clung to the flesh. To rush death was dangerous. To wait was merciful. In that fragile pause between breathing and stillness, funerals began not as endings, but as moments of doubt and care. Across Europe, the wake became the first step of farewell, a long night where no one slept. Relatives, neighbors, and friends gathered around the dead, their presence keeping both comfort and fear at bay. Some prayed, some sang softly, some told stories, even laughed a little. Not from disrespect, but to remind themselves that warmth still belonged to the living. Candles trembled against the pale skin of the deceased, as though guiding the soul on its journey to heaven. The wake was both holy and human. Food and drink were shared because kindness to others was believed to help the spirit find peace. In some homes, bread and water were left beside the body, a last offering to the soul that might still wander close. A steady flame meant rest. A dying candle meant unrest. For the mourners, these long hours were not about saying goodbye, but about standing guard between worlds, whispering to someone who could no longer answer until dawn broke, and they were certain the spirit had gone. Without modern preservation, the body soon changed and people had to face decay directly. But instead of turning away, they sanctified it. Churches filled with the scent of incense, myrrh, and burning herbs, not only to hide the smell, but to lift prayers upward like smoke. The body was washed and wrapped in linen scented with rosemary, resin, or frankincense, because purity of scent reflected purity of soul. Wealthy families called on apothecaries to preserve the body with salt, wine, or oils, while the poor filled their homes with wildflowers and herbs to protect against corruption. To them, scent carried meaning. Sweetness meant holiness. Foulness meant sin. The fragrance of sanctity, often said to rise from saints' bodies, was believed to prove divine acceptance. Every scent, every candle, every layer of cloth turned the body into something sacred, a bridge between the earth and the heavens. In villages, death was not private. It belonged to everyone. When the church bell rang, its sound echoed through the fields, calling peasants and lords alike to join the procession. Funerals could last days, filled with prayers, food, and ritual. The coffin, carried through the streets, reminded everyone that one day their turn would come. In towns across England and France, families sometimes hired mourners, women who cried aloud so that grief could have a voice. Beside the dead, people made peace with each other, ending feuds and sharing bread and ale with the poor, so that more prayers might rise for the departed. Their mourning was loud, physical, and public, because silence felt like abandonment. Every toll of the bell carried sorrow, but also connection. The living walking together with the dead one last time. For medieval Christians, funerals were not just farewells, but sacred duties. Death marked a passage through purgatory, a space where the soul was cleansed of sin before reaching heaven. That belief gave meaning to the endless prayers, the ringing bells, and the gifts to the church. Coins, candles, and bread were offered to shorten the soul's suffering. Every prayer was thought to lift it higher, every flame a light through the darkness. Families imagined their loved ones hovering between worlds, still hearing them, still needing their help. To stop praying too soon was betrayal. To pray endlessly was faith. Only when the flesh decayed and the soul was purified could peace begin. Among kings and nobles, death became a final display of power. Royal funerals stretched for weeks, turning death into grand ceremony. Monarchs were embalmed in rare spices, dressed in robes and crowns, carried through cities where people bowed as if before the living ruler. Some kings' hearts or entrails were buried separately in great cathedrals to spread their sacred presence. These acts weren't vanity, they were reassurance. The king might die, but the kingdom would not. In a world ruled by faith and fear, the funeral of a ruler became proof that order still held. The banners, the choirs, the smell of myrrh and gold-threaded cloth, all declared that the crown outlived the flesh. For the common people, mourning their king meant reaffirming the world's balance, ensuring that the realm of the dead reflected the living. In the Islamic world, the customs were guided by purity and simplicity. Unlike Europe's long vigils, Muslim burials took place quickly, within a day, because death was seen as a return to God, not an interruption. The body was washed with care, perfumed with musk, wrapped in white linen that erased all differences of rank. The community gathered shoulder to shoulder in prayer, their silence broken only by the rhythmic call for mercy. The burial was humble. No coffin, no grand monument, only earth. Yet the mourning that followed was full of grace. Quran recitations, food for the poor, soft words that kept the memory alive. Light and water, symbols of purity, marked every part of the ritual, showing that dignity needed no display. In Asia, funerals reflected harmony and devotion shaped by Confucian duty and Buddhist thought. In China, the body rested in the family hall surrounded by incense and white banners, while relatives kept vigil in shifts. To abandon the body too soon was to fail in love. In Japan, the night-long Otsuka wake blended prayer, music, and offerings so the soul wouldn't feel alone. In Korea and Vietnam, families burned incense, offered food, and balanced elements, water for cleansing, fire for transformation, to help the spirit cross peacefully. Death wasn't an ending, but a conversation between generations, a reminder that love could reach beyond the grave. For medieval people, death was everywhere: war, plague, famine, and yet they did not turn from it. Funerals taught humility, reflection, and gratitude. Monks repeated memento mori, remember that you must die, not to frighten, but to awaken. Looking at a corpse was to see one's own fate. Rich or poor, all shared the same end. Even peasants who watched a burial left thoughtful, aware that life was brief and precious. The long funerals gave space for that truth to settle, for sorrow to mature into wisdom. Death was not the opposite of life, but its mirror, whispering through every church bell that each breath was a gift, that would one day be gone. Across continents, cathedrals, deserts, and temples, the living could not let go too quickly. They burned candles, prayed, washed, sang, waited. Every act was a declaration against forgetting. To watch over a body for days was to say, "You still matter. You still belong to us." Their grief was devotion, their waiting an act of love. What seems strange to us now was once a language of tenderness, a way to meet death with grace, memory, and care. As the centuries turned, the way people faced death changed, but the emotion behind it stayed the same. In every corner of the medieval world, grief was a thread that tied people to their faith, their families, and the hope that love could reach beyond the grave. What united them was not the ritual itself, but the meaning they placed within it. The need to care for the soul one last time, to ensure it did not journey alone. Death, to them, was not darkness, but a crossing. In monasteries, monks sang long into the night, their voices echoing through cold stone halls. Each chant was a bridge between the living and the departed, each prayer a light in the invisible space between worlds. To stop praying was to abandon, so they didn't. Bells rang every hour to remind those awake and those asleep that a soul was passing through the great unknown. These sounds filled towns and villages, blending with the wind, so that even the distant fields heard the rhythm of farewell. For medieval people, that sound was not only grief, it was presence, a promise that even in death, one was not forgotten. In small homes, candles burned beside beds where bodies rested, their wax dripping like tears. Families whispered to the dead, telling them not to fear, speaking names of ancestors who would welcome them on the other side. Mothers told their children that souls became stars. Fathers lifted their hands to bless the departed, even when their own hearts trembled. There was no silence in these moments, only the soft sound of breathing, of wood creaking, of life trying to make sense of loss. The church guided the people through this mystery. Priests reminded them that every death was a test of faith. The world was temporary, but heaven was forever. The prayers of the living could still reach the souls of the dead, shortening their suffering, easing their path. Masses were paid for, bells were rung, candles were lit, all to help the spirit find peace. Even the poorest families gave what they could, a loaf of bread, a few coins, believing it might buy a little light in the next world. And yet, outside the churches, the human heart carried its own understanding. People still dreamed of their lost ones, still felt their presence in the wind, in the quiet corners of their homes. Some left a seat empty at the table. Others whispered goodnight to an unseen listener. The boundary between life and death remained thin, not frightening, but familiar, like a curtain that could be lifted for a moment when the world was still enough to remember. For the noble and the poor alike, funerals were a reflection of what they valued most: continuity, a belief that life did not end, but changed shape. Kings left monuments of stone and gold. Peasants left songs and memories. Both hoped that in some way their names would be spoken after they were gone. To be remembered was to stay alive in spirit. Forgetting, that was the true death they feared most. Even in faraway lands, this longing was the same. In the deserts of Arabia, the faithful prayed beneath open skies, their words carried by the wind. In the temples of Asia, incense burned through the night, curling upward like souls ascending. In the villages of Europe, candles flickered against frost-bitten windows, and children learned early what it meant to say goodbye. Death, though constant, was never ordinary. It forced people to pause, to look inward, to recognize the fragility of every breath. The rituals that grew around it were not simply tradition, they were humanity's oldest form of compassion. To wash a body, to light a candle, to whisper a name. Each was a way of saying, "You mattered." Over time, the world changed. Science replaced superstition, and speed replaced patience. The long vigils disappeared, the prayers shortened, and the candles grew fewer. Yet something was lost in that hurry. The medieval people, for all their fear and ignorance, understood something timeless, that mourning cannot be rushed, and remembrance is sacred. Their funerals lasted for days because grief needed time to breathe. Silence had meaning. Waiting was a form of love. They did not hide death behind closed doors. They faced it, they named it, and in doing so, they made peace with it. To the modern mind, their customs might seem strange, but behind every ritual was tenderness. Every flame, every tear, every song sung through the night carried one message, that even as the body fades, love remains. The soul of the departed and the hearts of the living met in that space between worlds, bound by memory. In the end, the medieval world teaches us something simple yet profound. Death is not only the end of life, it is proof of how deeply people once loved. What survives the grave is not the body, nor the wealth, nor even the name carved in stone. What endures is the echo of care left behind, the whisper of prayers in the dark, the light of candles that once burned for someone who was loved. And somewhere, across the centuries, that light still flickers.